Now are the famed Babson flags in front of Horn Library. It is a centerpiece for campus tour marketing, where the guides express the multinational aspect of the student body to prospective incoming freshmen. If they do decide to come to school here, they will learn about the reality and intricacies of international and domestic student interaction. This video is a small collection of interviews of students from diverse backgrounds. I have conducted this investigation to try and gather a better understanding of what kinds of perceptions exist about international students on campus. What hardships do international students face that may be unknown to others? And most importantly, get to the bottom of what this word BISO really means. The first question I asked people was, how did you find out about Babson, and what did Babson market to you about the international diversity of their student body? I was trying to find out what other people's experience was like, and what drew them to the campus, especially that of the international students I interviewed. I also wanted to see the difference between what was presented to them and what the reality came to be.
I heard about Babson from a professor. The professor told me about the entrepreneurship aspect, so I signed up and got a kind of pamphlet from them. The pamphlet accentuated, if I remember correctly, the international aspect. They showed all the countries that we had represented. I remember seeing the flags from Horn. I remember that they talked about the experience with being in a campus of international students and how that reflected upon real life experience and what you got in the real world. And before I got to Babson, that was about the extent in that pamphlet. It was probably from the marketing team that I got.
So now that you've been at Babson for a few years, how has their promise of, I guess for me it was international student interaction, getting to learn about how they do business, learning about their different cultures, for me it has been, how has that pre-freshman experience or what you've heard about it, how does that correlate to what you've actually experienced?
Yeah, I think it actually has changed over the years for me. So when I was a first year, I was in Maxwell's Hall, which is substance-free hall, but also just had a really diverse community in it. We had people represented from multiple different countries, multiple backgrounds and whatnot, and because it's a small hall, I actually became quite close with the individuals there and worked on projects with them and stuff like that. So I think in that aspect, my first year, I actually kind of got to delve deep into different backgrounds and whatnot, especially like FME, I think, as well. I got to learn about, I was CEO of a company there, and I got to learn the different backgrounds. We sat down with like one-on-ones, so I found where everybody's from and got to interact with them. But I do think when, first year semester kind of ended and building on to really more sophomore year, when everyone started finding out who their friends were or, where they wanted to be on campus or what they wanted to get involved in, I felt that that kind of took a back seat to really just doing things with people that you were used to or doing things with people that had kind of fit in the other roles or that you were on campus and whatnot. I think that people had become more in groups as I got older with just the grades. And I felt like when I was a first year that it was very much kind of actually what they were marketing.
They definitely advertise it pretty highly, but I think that it's sort of unrealistic in the way that they don't really say how a lot of the different international students tend to stick with the people that they're from, so it's not as diverse as it may seem. Like, it's harder to break the boundaries between the diversity. Even though it's all here, people tend to stay segregated.
That they had students from 51 countries. If you look at Horn Library, they have a whole bunch of flags, and they say they changed from the side. What I realize is that even though they're from like these crazy different places, that a lot of them do actually have similar experiences, and you tend to run into like the same type of person over and over because of this.
Well, I knew from the very beginning that I was going to come to America for school, so really it came down to a few characteristics about a school, and the level of international students, or the percentage of international students, is extremely important, and I definitely eliminated some schools. For example, Boston College at the time only had around 5% international students, and Babson at the time had 13%, which was higher than everywhere else, which really stood out. And my freshman year, that went up to 17%, and you can definitely see that in kind of the friends that you make and the people that you see around campus. So that was very important. But in terms of coming to America and why I chose Babson, I chose Babson because of the entrepreneurship focus that they have. That's kind of what I've always been interested in, and that really drew me to it. But the fact that they have so many international kids here is definitely a bonus for me. It helps me fit in way better, and from what I've heard and my friends' experiences at their schools, it's definitely not the same.
When I was looking at Babson, all I knew about Babson was through the internet and through people I knew. And the only people I knew who went here were all international students and, the past alums who live in Asia now, I guess. And so that was my first kind of view into Babson.
I then decide to ask the interviewees if they have ever heard about this BISO term. In what context is it used, and what kind of connotation does it have around campus? Many people already knew about the BISO stereotype, but it was interesting to see the struggle with distinguishing between the technical meaning and the actual usage of the term.
BISO, I think, refers to Babson International Student Organization. I could be wrong on the org part, but I'm pretty sure that's it. First time I actually heard the word was during my first staff meeting, sophomore year, actually. I had not been around the word. I know people kind of throw it around, but we were talking about like the different ways that it's used on campus and how people kind of perceive it and the tone that goes around with it. And it was something that we were just bringing up for new first years, kind of whether we wanted to, how we wanted to kind of phase it out, or if there was a way, because there seemed to be a very negative connotation with it. It seemed to be more of representative of a lazy or a non-doer rather than somebody who had international pride or somebody who was from a different country. So I think that my experience with it has been around people who are trying to phase it out a little bit more than focus on its meaning or because it seems like over the terms it's been a way to group a bunch of people who are totally different in a lot of aspects into one role, and it doesn't seem to be respected in that essence by the actual international organization from what I remember from training and stuff. Yeah, I think that, at least from my exposure to it, has been a negative term, also a grouping term. People of many different backgrounds. Just the same way I wouldn't want to be, classified as a national student or any degree of that. I think that there's also a lot of mix-up around students who have international backgrounds, but then, were born in the U.S., and then people referring to them as, the BISO term as well, and it just doesn't, I don't think it's a good grouping term or a term to put over a bunch of people, but I think that the perception has been overall negative.
Babson
International
Student
Organization. Kind of a negative connotation associated with that, so I feel like there's literal BISOs, and there's like BISO people who act like BISOs, because there are Americans who act like BISOs if you're going by the Babson definition, which is snooty people with a lot of money who go to clubs every weekend and are flivorous about their money, very pretentious. So there are American BISOs, in my opinion. BISO doesn't mean you're physically international. I think it means that you're actually, it's more of how you act than
the way
where you're from. Class is more of an overarching theme which has their common experience rather than like where they're physically from.
Someone who is particularly from like Latin America and they conduct themselves differently to most other people in that they wear fancier clothes, they drive fancier cars, they eat fancier food, they go out in Boston, they don't live on campus, they kind of stay to themselves. Technically, I'm BISO too because I'm an international student, and have some of those stereotypical traits in that I have a nicer car than most people and I don't like going to trim. But I don't like being associated as a BISO because it's seen as a negative thing. It's seen as you reject the culture of Babson and you think of yourself as something completely different, more elite or something. And I don't see myself like that at all, and I wouldn't ever want to be associated with that. So definitely someone saying something like, "Oh, you're such a BISO," is a derogatory way of speaking. But I don't remember when the first time I heard it, but definitely the first association I have of BISOs are the people who kind of stand around outside the library and smoke. That was definitely my first association with them, and then that kind of transferred into the cars and going out in Boston and that kind of thing.
So first of all, yes, I've definitely heard the term BISO. It originated from the Babson International Student Organization, and it used to be a club on campus. Started out in the 1970s, and I think around late 1980s. I did the research on this earlier, but they got shut down, and so now it's used as a derogatory term, in my opinion, from what I've heard from people around here. I don't think that's the case, but if that's what everyone thinks. What is a BISO? Typically, a BISO is a foreign student, anyone international. They're supposed to be known for their socioeconomic status and the fact that they live off campus and the fact that they drive expensive cars. I think that's what people think when they hear BISO. Technically, with those standards, like I'm a foreign student, blah, 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 so I would be considered a BISO, but then I don't really, I guess, fit the mold because I don't live off campus and, I don't drive an expensive car.
Babson prides itself on the opportunity for its student body to interact with other students from all over the world. This usually takes place in a classroom setting where groups are formed to work on various projects. One of the biggest complaints I've heard about working in groups is when some of the members are international students. English is oftentimes a second language, making communication difficult. They live farther away, or they have a culturally different expectation of work ethic. I decided to ask our interviewees what their experience has been working in groups like these.
I have had a class with a international student at Babson, and I do think that the dynamic is different, and rightly so, because there are barriers and there are advances that each background brings. So, for instance, I've worked with students who I have had a little bit harder time understanding, and that's been great because I know it's not their first language, and I know that they are trying to compensate by helping me out, but also I've had students who don't speak the same language as multiple, who don't speak the same language as English, so they'll speak their native language to each other and then kind of speak one language to me as well. So that does get a little bit frustrating sometimes when you're trying to manage the different language barriers, but I think it's typical of working with an international group. On the other side, I think that there's a lot of advances by getting those different backgrounds. I remember I was doing a project that involved like international perspective in terms of we were trying, it was like a kind of cage analysis. We were taking ASM, and it was about expanding internationally, and one of the students had backgrounds, visiting the country, one of the students had lived in the country, and it was just very helpful to get the culture of that, and it kind of did help out throughout the whole thing. So that was a great experience.
But there was an international student in our group who never came to any of the meetings. As much as we reached out to him or knocked on his door and did anything, he would never come to meetings. And then on the final day, he put his name on our project that we all worked like endless hours on, and we were so frustrated. So we actually went to the professor over the peer evaluations because we didn't want to bash the person or tell them, because we didn't really understand the circumstances. And our professor responded by telling us that we have to consider the fact that some of these international students may be coming here not necessarily because they want to pursue business or because it's their passion to start a company, but because their parents are forcing them to come here so that they can take over their family company. And it's something that we actually never considered.
Working in a group with them was impossible. I think it was my first experience of actually struggling to communicate with the group member that they were responsible for this, and if they weren't going to be responsible, then just to tell us. And because it was a girl, I found it even harder to tell her, like, you are not doing your job, without her being like, oh my god, you're being, can I say bitch? You're being such a bitch. And that obviously led to like group dilemmas and group drama, and it led to me doing all the work and just me having really bitter feelings, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, she kind of played it off, and she was just like, I hope everything was good at the end of this, and she still didn't do the work, but it got to the point where I just had no expectations of this BISO to do the work. Again, it's a stereotype, like people don't want BISOs on their team because they are seen to not be as committed, don't care about their grades, really only care about socializing, aren't seen as welcoming or like wanting to work in teams with other people. That's the stereotype, and unfortunately the 2 projects where I've worked with BISOs, it's been true. So yeah, there's a bit of like a cultural stereotype, but there's also just my personal experience has been in line with that. I can't think of a single BISO who I met who then like shattered those expectations. You know what I mean? I hope that I do a good job with that, but then people don't think of me as a BISO, so.
Why do you think that is?
Because I purposefully tried to not be associated with that, but secondly also because I'm not friends with the typical BISO student. And I try not to do or act in ways that would be seen as, like, I could always, like wear really fancy clothes and only associate with a certain group of people and only go out in Boston and not really care to live in a suite with other people and be open to meeting exchange students and taking other classes with people I don't know. Like, those are all things that I've done on purpose, partly because that's who I am and partly because I don't want to be associated that way.
But in terms of like working with the BISO, yeah, I've worked with a lot of international students and I've had no problems communicating with them and working with them. But obviously, there's obviously that challenge when you're trying to get work done on a Sunday evening and someone has to drive from Boston and they may not be willing to do that just for a 2-hour meeting.
Now that we have kind of explored the circumstances that surround the word BISO, what does it mean for the campus? Is it actually harmful to students? Does it need to be stopped by administration? Or does this action need to come from within the student body?
The one word can't ever describe, or the acronym rather, can't ever describe all international students as a whole because there's such a large percentage of them as well. I think that in terms of, are any groups, misrepresented by them, I think that it just gives a bad label to people who also might just have different backgrounds and appear national or appear international, or just there's so much more to people's backgrounds and heritage than where they were, where they were born, as opposed to like what their background is and whatnot. I think it also just, I think the word has a negative connotation, so people inherently have kind of labeled that different characteristics of how people work together in that manner, whereas, I've never worked with an international student who hasn't brought a great dynamic to the group the same way that any other student has that I've worked with. And so I think that negative word or negative connotation that goes along with it definitely is stifling like more interaction, more group work, more, kind of collaboration with international and national students as 2 groups. With Babson being so intentionally international, as Lynn Schlesinger used to say, I think that it would be great to see the term fizzle out, if possible, and to see some organization from both sides of the spectrum to make that happen.
I don't think that it's a good term to have at the school, and I think that it's kind of, it's degrading to everyone else, even more so than to the BISOs themselves. Like, it's degrading to put everyone else on a level below.
So that's like it.
I don't know why though it is so negative, because people, I think it's because like one BISO, I guess, must have started acting like that and being like extremely excessive about how much money they had and putting themselves out there in that way, and other people must have felt like that was the way that they needed to behave as well, because typically, like, coming from a family with a lot of money isn't something that should have a negative connotation. It's privilege, and it's something most of the people here strive to be, but for some reason we have that label on it at this school, and I think it's because people tend to feed into the stereotype that we all give it. Like, we all put that label on people.
When I first came in as a freshman, everyone was like, "Oh, he's a BISO." because I didn't know the culture here. First time here, I spoke differently. I had different expectations. It's like, I guess, but slowly I placed myself outside that mold because I didn't live off campus and I don't drive. So if you think about it, I don't fit the traditional mold. But if you ask me, is it a bad thing or a good thing, or is a term affect me, I guess? I don't think so. I think it's interesting because Babson is so culturally and, international and so diverse, basically. It's more of the fact that, in my opinion, when someone says BISO, right, I mean, I don't think it's a derogatory thing. People don't look down upon me or look up to me when they say BISO or anyone else. And I think it depends on the scenario because it's not like a thing that divides people based on the basis of race. It's more on the basis of socioeconomic status, and that's going to be anywhere. And it's more about if you choose to embrace the fact that you're here to study and be a community versus, alienate people by calling them terms. So I think it's the way you look at it. Because in my last 4 years at Babson, I've never faced anyone having a problem with, the fact that, they're being called upon because they're BISOs, or, the fact that it's a discriminatory thing. I mean, yes, people talk about it and it's funny and cool to talk about, but in my opinion, it hasn't affected the campus in a bad way. If anything, it helps people talk about it, and I think it's about having a conversation. So I'll leave it at that.
Definitely. The English is a first language thing. I think definitely that's a good point to touch on because most of them have a strong Latin American accent or Spanish accent, which distinguishes them. So yeah, naturally when you hear someone with that accent, you assume, partly because also the way that they're dressed and then they're also speaking that way, you assume that they're a BISO. But like I said before, it's a negative term. It's not used nicely. It doesn't include all the international students at Babson. There are so many, and like you said, it's only the Latin American population that kind of fits into that stereotype. So yeah, it's not used well on campus, unfortunately. And there is no reason for anyone to distinguish between someone who was an international student and not, because it seems to me that every other, maybe this is an exaggeration, but it seems as if all the other international students gel or are able to integrate into the general culture pretty easily without distinguishing themselves, and that could be because of the accents not being different, or because they feel okay to not to not stick in their clans or whatever. You do see it. Some Asian students are always sticking together and stuff, but they aren't. That BISO lifestyle is about going out and spending money and being obnoxious about your wealth, and Asians and clans don't do that. Only the Latin American people do. I do think it's not good on campus because I don't necessarily hate BISOs, but I know students who do. I know students who will really stress out if they find out that they have a BISO on their group, or will necessarily stay away from BISOs, and because of the stereotype that they have. It's not a positive term, and it would be interesting to see how they felt about it, but I'm guessing that they would say that they didn't care, and it only pushed them further away from the general population, because it's bound to happen. The more you single them out, the more you make fun of them, stereotype them, the less inclined they'll be to actually fight against that label that you're putting on them, especially when they have their own very strong community of people. I'm making them sound like aliens, but they're not. They are in our community, and we have to work with them, and we see them around, but we've conveniently placed them in this box that people oftentimes don't want to touch.
Moving to a new place or environment brings on a baseline of stress. International students must adapt to the new college lifestyle, while also having to acclimate themselves to a new culture and language. This added stress causes them to gravitate to familiar groups, which usually form strong bonds. These groups are hard to leave as a member, and even harder to penetrate as an outsider. I wondered how people thought the term BISO originated, and why it has persisted over the years, so I asked them, where did the word BISO come from?
I don't think it comes from a place that doesn't make sense, because you have to understand, if people are coming to this school, they're paying full price normally if they're an international student. a lot of times coming, like, if you come from Mexico, your dollar is 7 times weaker than our dollar, and you can still afford to pay for the school in full. So, like, assuming that you're rich or, like, have a good bit of money, I don't think is, like, something that's so negative because it's kind of true. Like, they kind of have to own that aspect of it because it is almost in all cases that I found is a fact. Like, sometimes there's, like, scholarships and stuff like that, but, like, I would say 98% of BSOs do have a lot of money. A lot of these kids who come here, I know like, they have, like, 6 friends who came here and they all know each other and can stay within their own group. They, although get a lot of people all around the world, I feel like they tend to get a lot of people from the same place. Because I know Turkish friend we both have in common. They have like a lineage of friends from like freshmen to seniors, all coming from like the same place. And then I even know how like Spanish friends I have from like Venezuela and stuff. They all went to the same place in Venezuela. So it's like there's like this automatic connection, and it allows behavior to persist all throughout these areas. And the Babson must be recruiting from the same places over and over and over, or getting their word out to the same places, allowing this behavior to like. I mean, I'm not saying that those two groups were negative behavior, but allowing the same people from the same places to keep coming here and like create this if negative BISO connotation to keep going. They're not forced to interact with people.
But do the BISOs even think that it's negative?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But it's not. It may not. It's not even negative to them. And I'm not even saying that those groups I mentioned were negative. It's just like it allows that behavior to persist because like people come from the same lifestyle, interact with people from the same lifestyle a lot of time.
I don't think it's that they're ostracized. I mean, everyone's scared of what they don't know, which probably, I mean, it definitely plays into it in some aspect, but it's more that because of the fact that people are afraid of the unknown, they stick with what they know. And when you're from a foreign country and you come here and your friend from Italy has been at this school and they're sophomore or junior and they are classified as BISO and they act the same way that they have because the people who are older than them or the same age as them acted the way that they did when they got here, like by default you are comforted by the same people from your country, and then you're forced to act the same way because that's who you surround yourself with, because it's like where you find your immediate comfort.
Essentially, the organization was formed because all these international students, when they first got here, they had no idea how to assimilate into the culture. So all the people who were not local just formed a group, came together, and that was their support mechanism. You know what I mean? Think about it. If you go to a different country and you meet an American, you'd first go and talk to them and be like, you know, how have you been doing this in that country, right? It's the same thing here. When I first came here, though there was no one else from Nepal here, but there were some students here from India, Singapore, you know, and I'd been around that area, so I connected with them right off the bat. And, you know, I asked them, you know, so is there anything I should know, any best practices, what do I do to succeed in college, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So, if you think about it, that's why the organization was formed. So I think it's a very divided approach on how that term is used. Among students, I think, you know, we think it's funny, you know, it's a way to connect with people. It's something, it's a talking point, you know, so like when you first come in and you're like trying to meet international students and you're like, oh, he's a BISO, oh, he's a BISO. Just because, I mean, it's just, you know, it's just, we don't think about it too much, but people think of it in a funny way, I think, because you're like, you know, you see them drive a Ferrari or something and it's them versus you kind of thing. But in terms of, you know, when you talk and when administration thinks about it, it's like a derogatory thing. It's, you know, something that divides people, and yeah, perhaps it does divide people, but it's more serious, you know, when they think about the term BISO versus BIDU, because I think on campus people just throw the word just, you know, without thinking too much. So it's not as serious, I guess. So, again, I think, you know, people term people as BISOs to put them in buckets. You know, as I was saying, be it one tower, be it a lax bro, these are all buckets. So I think it's just easier for people to label people. And I think that's really what it is. Because if you think about it, we're here all in college, we're all young. You know, we all want to have fun, go out, party. You know, but if you think about it, international students would, I mean, you know, from where they're from back home, they start drinking when they're 18, right? So for them to go to a dorm party where, you know, traditionally the American students who, you know, who are not allowed to have that drinking privilege till 21 because by law or, you know, till you come to college. So it's just, if you think about that divide, international students are used to it since since they're 18 and they come to college here, and for them, drinking beer and enjoying, you know, dorm parties is not a big thing. For them, they're used to going to clubs, etc., etc. So it's just a division because the American students have not seen that concept as openly. I mean, probably with their parents in high school, but it's not as open, and you have to do it in hiding. So it's just a divide where we're both the same category of students. It's just people want to have fun in a different way. From where they come from, they do it differently. So obviously, when they come to school first time and they meet people, they assimilate more with people who are like them and have the same background and the same way of doing things. I think that's where divides people into buckets. So if you think about the track team, it's a group of people. They spend so much time together that even off the team, they live together, they go to trim together, they study together. It's just people you hang out with, right? So I think that same thing comes in with BISO, where a lot of the students on campus think they live off campus. They don't see them as much, and they always see them going to clubs, etc., etc. So people put them in that bucket, calling them BISO. So.
But I think the other thing that I just thought of with BISO is that it all sort of happens in a group. Any BISO that's doing something on their own accord as an individual is usually not seen as a BISO because they aren't in that group mentality of we all do the same things in the same classes and eat together and go out together. And yeah, I think it's like a group thing as well.
It's a very much student thing, right? So it's not very much an administrative thing. So I think the conversation had happened, and I think the conversation, was meant to create action steps for students. It's not something that I would expect them to take a role in phasing out or expect them to kind of, champion or hone. I expected the student role taken in because it was student created and it's obviously been student enforced. So I think that it was actually more so just dropped on the student end of actually, figuring out ways that could happen, or diving a little bit more deeper into it. It's kind of something I think is just kind of put on the back burner just because it seems like so hard to kind of tackle a larger concept that people have just kind of been passed down.
So are these action steps something that exists, or is it just kind of like, oh, we need something, we need some action steps?
Yeah, I think when we were talking about it originally, it was more to create conversation. So it was more to get opinions and then more to get, because just one person thinks that, it's not the best term to be used, or maybe it's grouping people who maybe doesn't mean everybody else is thinking that. So I remember specifically just conversation around, how is perceived, what does the student population think of this? I don't think there were defined action steps to come out of it, and I don't think they've been followed on either. So I think that there's a lot of room, if that was something that, people wanted to take on or look into, if the organizations or the, international students individually had felt that that was a negative term to them as well, that there might be some good representation on the international side and the national side to kind of pair up and maybe get rid of it, if that was something they're uncomfortable with.
Oh, 100%. I think so many groups are misrepresented on campus. I mean, as I said, I'm international. Technically, I should be a BISO, but unlike other international students, I just chose to live on campus. I wanted to be here on campus, seeping the American culture, as you would call it, I guess. And I joined a fraternity, and normally people would not do that, who are especially not from this part of the world. And so I guess I don't really fit the traditional mold of a BISO.
Many international students come to America for the education. What they do not think about is that 3 years down the line, they will have to start looking for a job. It is extremely competitive, however, to stay in America. Here are some real experiences that Babson international students have had trying to gain employment.
That's the worst part of being an international student in America. We get a year. I'm in the same problem. On the F1, you get a year after you graduate to find something, and if you don't find it in that year, then you have to leave. Personal experience at Babson, we have a Career Connections website that allows all students, or is supposed to allow all students to apply. 95% of those jobs are eligible for me because I'm an international student, and I don't even see the apply button because if you're an international student, you just can't apply. There is a separate, smaller website for international students that really just isn't as comprehensive, and I've obviously if I see a job that I like and I can't apply through Babson and I can't leverage that connection, one, what is the value added at all then, right? That's why I came to Babson. Babson speaks so strongly about their reputation as entrepreneurs and about their alumni network, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're not applying through Babson, then I think that's value lost. But I'm always able to apply independently. And then that makes me wonder, does that decrease my chances? Because if Babson is not letting me apply and this company isn't looking for international students, what are the chances that if I apply independently that they would consider me? And that limits me in two ways. One, I have to be very honest about it, like, look, you're going to have to go through this process for me. Are you okay with that? Can you afford it? And secondly, that limits me to big companies because usually startups don't have the funds to do it, don't have the time, energy, or the funds to do it for me. It's just it's annoying, and I don't bring something so unique to the table that they're like, oh, we have to have you, we don't care. I think it's the biggest problem that they don't tell you about. They tell you, regardless of who you are when you come to that orientation before freshman year, they tell you, you're going to lead to this many jobs, and this is the network, and blah, 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 and they don't say how that's going to, how being an international student is actually really quite hard to find a job.
To be very frank, it's been tougher than I thought it would be. When I first came here, I don't have an intention to affect anyone's employment, and harp upon someone else's opportunities, but I want to be given a fair chance to represent myself. And the biggest problem I have is, when you submit an application to start out with, right, there's always a thing saying, are you an international student, or are you a U.S. citizen? And would you ever in the future need sponsorship? So, obviously you don't lie in those applications. So you say, yes, I'm not a U.S. citizen, and yes, I would need a sponsorship in the future. From what I've heard from a lot of recruiters, once you say yes, you would need sponsorship, you go into a whole different pile in terms of applications. And to get a job for someone who's international, from what I've heard and from all the efforts that I've put in, it's relatively tough. In fact, it's very tough because of that sponsorship aspect. So I can work here for a year after graduation, but despite that, so if I'm trying to get into finance, let's say investment banking, asset management, something along those lines, and normally there are 2-year programs, so the fact that I only have 1 year, and after that 1 year, it's over and I can apply for sponsorship, and the possibility of me getting sponsorship is 60-40, 60 of me going back and 40 of me staying here. The employer doesn't want to take a chance. So if you think about when I'm applying for a job on campus, on the Career Connections page, if there are 100 openings, I can only apply to 7. You know what I mean? So the people who are willing to at least give me that opportunity to at least interview with them is so small. And normally the people who do give me that opportunity to interview with them are the bigger banks, and the bigger companies that are willing to move you to a different country if things don't work out. So, but on a realistic level, it's been really tough. I've been on the application process last, I think, 9 months, and I was lucky to have a great summer internship, and they wanted to call me back, but sponsorship issue was apparent, and I think going forward, I think it's important to address that because we come in here, we get trained by the school, we're qualified, I would think, but the only reason I can't work is because of my immigration status, and perhaps, in my opinion, I think I could contribute more because I have that hunger. I want to be here. I want to make a difference, but I'm not given that opportunity. So I think that is discrimination, if not anything else.
As you can see, many students have a variety of very interesting and unique perspectives on what a BISO is. I think the campus has a long way to go in ridding the negative connotation of this word, but the action must come from within the student body. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed and got an increased understanding about the social dynamic on the Babson College campus.